Welcome to Unwritten Stories of Significance. The story tonight that I'm bringing you is it's a story of significance, really it is. It's a story of a woman whose story has been brought to humanity, to us, by a son in collaboration by two brothers. This story is going to tell you what you can overcome, what you can endure, and what you can do with your lives. I'd like to introduce to you the incredible young men who put together the book Goddie of their mother, Dottie Picart. I'd like to introduce to you Robert Picart and Richard Picart. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're so welcome. Welcome, Richard. Welcome.
Good morning. Good evening.
Good evening, hon. I hope I did that justice, because when I'm introducing my guests, I always refer back to the pre-interview, to what I have done with the story, and I'm finding the right words because it's a very touching story. And as I spoke off camera, it reflected back on my own parents' lives. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself to the viewers because it's an amazing story. So we'll start off with Robert, who is the author of the book.
Thank you once again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And so, yeah, we are introducing Goddie, which is, a story of a woman that's went through a lot and born in Jamaica and had to navigate a series of trials and tribulations and overcome a lot of things, not unlike others, but really navigate her way through early childhood trauma and tribulation, and also triumph as well. I was blessed to be able to interact with my mom and capture her story. And I'm just glad to be able to present it to you this evening.
Awesome. Thank you. Richard, I know you're a big part of this book too. So if you'd like to introduce yourself to the viewers, please.
Sure. My name is Richard Picart. I'm the eldest of the twin pair you have before you. And I'm a Canadian native. We're raised in the city of Toronto, and we're born into a family of faith, a very strong Jamaican heritage. And I'm a family person myself. My daily work finds me in the creative spaces with marketing, digital marketing, and various creative directives. And so, as it relates to my role at the book, I really provided the creative oversight and led the curriculum project, which is an important component of this story as we seek to amplify the story of Goddie through education and getting that material into the hands of young people so they can learn about the culture, the sights, the sounds, and the stories of Jamaica.
Okay, I'm just going to stick with Richard for a second here, Robert. When you say getting in the hands of young people, which is a show which is Unwritten Stories of Significance, amplifying the platform and stories for young people to be inspired. And this is one definite one that's doing it. So if you could elaborate on that more, on why do you want it in the hands? Why is this story so significant? Why does it need to be heard and read?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that is important to us is the legacy of the story and not just the story of itself. And what I mean by that is, certainly a number of books are written all the time, and it's a tremendous accomplishment to do that. But the role of this book is one where it provides a resource for Canadians, and especially for Afro-Caribbean citizens, to see themselves. It allows them to experience representation in literature. It allows them to share with their peers and help their peers to raise their cultural competency. Jamaica is more than a patty and a jerk chicken at your local shop. There's a deep, rich history that spans both in geography, in foods, culture, music, and also, to understand the hardship that people from the diaspora coming from the region experience and how they arrive and how they show up in Canada. There's some things that society has amplified rightly so. When it comes to Jamaica, Rasta culture, red, green, and gold, reggae music, all of these things are valuable medallions on the culture wall of Jamaica. But there's also what happened in the mid-century. Jamaica existed before the 70s. Jamaica goes all the way back into the slave times. And
Right.
so how did that impact the characters and the drive of Jamaican people? And so one of the reasons that it's important for us to allow young people to, and not just young people, but people in general, but to access this and be edified from it, because it does allow us to build community and to deepen the understanding of the contributions of people from Jamaica, and on a wider scope, people from the Afro-Caribbean diaspora and their contributions to Canada.
Very well said. I couldn't have said it any better. Amazing. Robert.
Yes, ma'am.
You had the pleasure, and I had the enjoyment of listening to a live recording on a podcast series, folks, so you can get this great information we'll talk about later. But if you can share what it was like interviewing your mom. And how old is your mom?
94 now.
94. So if you can educate our viewers, inspire our viewers on what it was like putting all this beautiful content together in this amazing book, Goddie.
It was a very surreal experience. We all talk to our parents every day for whatever reason. And but to be able to sit down during COVID time and really have really deep conversations, and it was a really specific window of time where everybody was sitting still during COVID. And so it was an opportunity to just learn. She had told us stories as we were children and that type of thing, but this was really something where I wanted to just capture. And just to begin, I mean, the book actually started off as a podcast, and
Yes.
It was meant to be a podcast. It was just us capturing her voice and capturing her stories so that, we could play for the kids or just have it in general. And, as she started, talking about, where she grew up and what she did, I started learning facts I had never heard before. And it became very inspiring. And she started teaching me about elements of Jamaica that I'd never learned before, even though I'd visited the island many times. And so I felt that it was a bit of a responsibility after hearing all this information that it be organized and relayed in a responsible way. And I felt that her story was worthy. And I felt that there was a moment here where we could really capture who she was as a person. I felt that we could capture her story, capture the legacy of Jamaica, bind together the history of slavery, the transition of Black people through the Commonwealth to Canada, and quite frankly, lay tribute to my mom and lay tribute to her work and her contributions to my life. So I considered a blessing that I was favored to do so.
Well, I'm jealous because, boy, I'm jealous. Guys, look at the smiles in your faces, because my mother passed away last year, and what you've done is a tribute to her as she's still alive. Yes. And as young people or children, we hear our parents talk, but it's not until I listened to the conversations that she had with you, which the viewers are going to enjoy just a little portion of this wonderful story. If we can just have it for our listeners, please, we're going to share a little bit from Goddie.
While the country was one of the most expensive places on the planet at the time, the wealth rested in the hands of a very small non-Black populace.
Because that back in those days, that was the Depression, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know much about the Depression. I know during the war we didn't have much, and growing up as kids we didn't have shoes like kids have here, running shoe socks and nice clothes. Mommy used to sew clothes. She had a sewing machine. My sister Loretta, she used to sew too. Make clothes for her, school clothes, navy skirt and white blouse and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So what was like a typical day for school?
Well, we had to be at school for 8:45.
So you walked to school?
Are you kidding? Walk to school. We have to walk to school. Barefoot too. When you get the bottom spring, you stop and wash your foot, rub it with some coconut oil.
Oh my gosh. Now, you know what is so real when I listen to that, guys, is the patois. That's why I had to have the viewers listen to it, because one thing to read a book, but it's to listen to that authentic, and the way she talked about the shoes and the coconut oil, and you know what I mean? Like, how was that? Like, anyone can jump in here. Like, listening to her share her story, like,
it's living history.
Yes.
It's very rare that we get living actual history from our heroes. And so it really was a moment to hear her. And, you're hearing it in the podcast, but I ended up having several conversations, and really several hours of conversation about her life, and ended up using that as source material for the book. But just to hear her voice, her description of, and what's really interesting is that, as we get older, our short-term memory isn't always so good. We don't remember things, that happened an hour ago. But her long-term memory, in terms of the finite, granular details of Jamaica, the descriptions, what the house looked like, and all the things that, gosh, at 90 plus years old, you'd think they wouldn't remember. She has a very vivid memory of. And she was able to really paint a picture of what it meant to be born in 1929, being raised through the early 40s, of being poor in a house with 9 other siblings. She was the middle child. She was the hinge of the siblings. And so she had to take care of the younger ones and report to the older ones.
That's right.
And so when you have that unique position in the family, you have a perspective that is amazing. So yeah, it was a very textured and granular experience for her to share her history with us. So I'm blessed.
Well, as I said, I'm jealous, because I remember, if I may say a little bit here, talking to my own mom, who was born in Clarendon, Jamaica, and she'd always say district. And when I heard Goddie said district, I went, oh my God, that's what my mom used to say.
Yes.
And then she talked about the coffee, and then she talked about walking to school and rubbing her feet, rubbing her legs, her calves with coconut oil. Everything came back. So when people listen and read this book, Jamaicans, as well as what Richard was saying about educating our youth on what Jamaicans have go through, it lets them know of the culture, because culture is so important. If you can amplify that again, Richard, why is it so important? Because culture is important so we can respect each other and understand where we came from.
Well, I think one of the things that when I'm asked this question, I tend to lean into is, who is this story written for? And I guess, synonymously, why is this story written? And looking back, it is a literary celebration of an immigrant's journey. All right. It takes, the awesome yet complex story of a young woman in Jamaica around World War II. So just to place it in the continuum of time for the audience, we're not talking in the 70s and 80s yet. We're talking about in the 40s. The war has just ended. Jamaica is still a British territory. People are, there's a lot of movement happening globally, not that much different than what's happening now. And there's the haves and very much the have-nots. And this takes the story of a young lady through her journey in that season and brings it all the way forward to the 70s. And so, it's a celebration of that, because you live in Canada, you talk to anyone over the age of 65, 70 and ask them where you're from or where your parents are from, there's going to be a story there. And so the fact that this story is documented, and the trials and tribulations, the courage and the voyage is documented, it is a celebration of that. In Canada, we very much lean forward towards the tapestry of Canada and how we all come together to form one nation. And absolutely that is true. But before you get to a tapestry, you have spools of thread. And those spools of thread come from different countries and different experiences. There are identities that existed before they came to Canada, and telling those stories enrich the Canadian experience. So that's one thing. Next thing is it talks about, you know, the celebration of mothers, and even in particular single mothers. Certainly don't want to give away the story to our readers, but there's a point where our mother became single, and it was quite a traumatic situation. And so that's not that different from many mothers or many families, I should say, who have had to navigate not just new countries, new relationships, new people, and sometimes a family ends up taking some harm and some trauma through that. And then the last thing I want to acknowledge is, you know, the celebration of West Indian people and people of Afro-Caribbean culture. We're special. We're very resilient. We are the titanium that a lot of people don't recognize. And Robert had said in a previous conversation, we just don't understand what the strength that our people have. And so underscoring that through this book, I think will allow folks to, when they see a person on the street who they perhaps suspect is coming from the culture, allow them to see them just slightly differently, and to understand where they come from.
Can I interject there for a second? We got to go to break. We're going to pick up from that because I know that you were flowing from your heart. We'll be right back, guys, with this phenomenal story on Goddie. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Unwritten Stories of Significance. Richard and Robert, on that book, Goddie. Like, I can't say enough about this interview, guys. I know I had to cut Richard off because he was talking so passionate, so passionate. Did I leave anything out there, Richard, before I go on to my next question?
The only thing that I would say, just to kind of put a ribbon on it, especially for our history buffs that may be listening, Jamaica has a very strong record in slavery and colonialism. Slavery ended in the mid 1830s. I think it was 1834 it ended, and colonialism, some would argue, still has its hooks into Jamaica up to this point, although Jamaica is independent. And so, in the World War II times, you still saw evidence of the economic disparity in Jamaica. You still saw people divided not only by cultures, but by the privilege those cultures gave them. And so it wasn't unusual to see white people or people who identify as white living very affluent lives because they now had almost 100 years of inheritance from the fruits of slavery. And then, you go to the other end of the spectrum, which is the Ormsby spectrum, which is where Goddie's from. And her family, one of the reasons that she was separated from her family is because her family couldn't keep them together because the agricultural prices in the open market dropped. And just a slight change in the agricultural prices caused them to be able to afford to feed one child out of the 9. So, and this is on the same island, back in the mid-centuries. And this is just after World War II. And so those factoids and that realization is important for people to have a grasp of as we journey with them through this story.
Thank you so much. Robert, you sat down with your mother, and through that interview, that little snip there that I took, I wish I could have more time to do it, but they got to get the book. So there you go. That's the whole focus of it, right?
Yes.
We talked about disparity of wealth. And you talked about that, and then she started to talk. Can you talk about that from why, just if you can touch upon that from your thoughts on there and bring that through on why we are still like that today. Like, it's an ongoing conversation.
There's a lot of sides to it. So disparity of wealth, in many cases, you're talking about access to capital.
Yes.
And you're talking about who has access to capital. And so when we think about the changing faces of Jamaica, Jamaica started off, if you go all the way back, you start off with the Arawak Indians in Jamaica. And then the Nigerians came and other groups came. And then, our brethren from India came and folks from China came. And as those spaces started to change and evolve, so did also the access to capital. who had the opportunities to build businesses, who had the opportunities to access the ports for shipping, who had the opportunity for transportation and logistics. And all those things lay into whether or not you have the opportunity to build wealth amongst your community and amongst your family. And in many cases, as we know, as Richard laid out, even though slavery was over, the remnants of slavery, the traditions, the politics, the structures, the economic access still laid bare. And so while other groups may have been able to accelerate beyond slavery or beyond indentured labor situations, a lot of Black Jamaicans still had to figure it out. And in many cases, figuring it out meant leaving what they know and going somewhere where they've never been to get something that they've never had, and leaving all of what they had in Jamaica behind just to be able to turn the page on it. And so with that, of course, becomes the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, not just from Jamaicans, but Jamaicans who even look different one amongst each other. And it's a legacy that still happens today. It's no different than perhaps any other island or even areas of the United States as well.
There was a portion in there, I'm just recurring back now to the conversation you have with your mom, where she said that she never told anybody she was leaving Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
She never told anybody. She never told. Why? Like, I'm asking a question. I'm being the devil's advocate for a second. Why?
She didn't tell anybody because that you're putting yourself at risk. The times at that time were difficult. And, as the Jamaicans like to call it bad mind, right? So you folks weren't always rooting for you. And the reality is that whenever you had that crack in the door, it was a very fragile opportunity. And it's like a fractured egg. And you didn't want to do anything to upset that opportunity, even in the slightest. So even by sharing a fragment of that information, you stand the risk of ruining your one chance to turn the page in your life. And she was very clear, and she knew about that. Remember now, when she gets to the point of that decision, she's already had both her parents pass away. She's already had her siblings pass away. She's had people betray her over and over. She's had to start her life over and over from the middle. And so when you've had that type of scarring, you tend to be very guarded about what you're going to do next and who you're going to share that with. And that happens today, even today, when we make decisions, we don't always tell everyone. We want to make sure that it's a sure situation. So it was a very fragile time, very fragile time.
When you look at your mother now and you have put out this tribute to her story and a rich story, how do you both feel being her children? How do you feel when you look at her of what sometimes we as humanity today go through? But like that is something else, as you just outlined. How do you feel?
Personally, as her son, I feel that I'm obviously very proud to be her son. I carry a very strong legacy of her family, my family, and of Jamaica overall. And then I'll look at it also another way. Her legacy also garners my actions. When I think about sometimes I don't want to get out of bed because I'm tired, and you're like, okay, well, are you really that tired? My mom has gone through 10 times worse and had to survive much more than just swinging her feet out of a fancy bed. And so it really kind of garners my energies, what I think about, how I spend my time, how I spend my money, what I worry about. When you remember back, people had to worry about things that were actually meaningful. And now, the Wi-Fi goes out and everybody's upset.
That's right.
And so it really kind of garners, how you think about things. And then I guess the third part is just holding up myself and the legacy of her work and making sure that my actions and what I do and what I say doesn't bring any ill repute to her name and to who she is as a person and her contributions to my life and to Canada overall. I need to do well. I need to contribute back. And I take that very seriously.
Oh my God. Wow. Can I get just 1 minute out of Richard? I don't want to lose the time because we only have 2 minutes left on what you feel being her son.
Responsible. We are responsible for her name and her story. We have been given this mantle and we have to carry it. And if I speak honestly, I didn't feel that way prior to the book being developed. But seeing how this story has resonated not only with Canadians, but more specifically Jamaicans living here in Canada and people from the Caribbean who said they see themselves in the story. Personally, I see the responsibility of of making sure that it resonates in time. So this is why we created resources for the schools to be able to use it to teach about Jamaican culture and to teach about the Black experience. And that's why, even while we're here with you today, to continue to resonate this story in time. So we certainly we're blessed, but we have a responsibility and to carry her name. And it's a heavy load. It's not light, but we carry it with tremendous pride and courage. We certainly invite everyone to check out the book Goddie, to go to the website goddiebook.com, GODDIE book.com, if they want to learn more information, and enjoy it. Let us know what you think.
I want to thank you both, Robert and Richard Picart, for being Unwritten. You got to come back. It's a strong conversation. All right?
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.